Councillor Horton, your meeting is now live.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Children, Families and Education Portfolio meeting. I'm Councillor Susie Horton. I'm the Cabinet Member for Children, Families and Education, and I'll be chairing the meeting today. This is being held virtually in response to the limitations placed on governance by the COVID-19 pandemic, and the City Solicitor has advised that this meeting will be run by reference to the model standing orders as set out in the Local Authorities Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authority Meetings Regulations 2020 number 392. So members of the public are invited to view this meeting, and there has been the opportunity for written representations to be submitted before. So those present, welcome again. You're requested to keep your microphones on mute and to only turn them on when you are called to speak. Members are requested to keep their cameras turned on at all times. And officers, you're requested to turn your cameras on only when you're presenting your reports or asking questions. So thank you very much for that. If anyone would like to speak, if you could write your name and RTS, which is request to speak, in the chat function. I'll have to make sure I'm on a different device today. Okay, I've got the chat function showing, so I can look at that, and I'll keep an eye out, and I'm sure Lisa will remind me if I've missed anyone. If there are any technical difficulties, we will endeavour to resolve these, and where necessary, we'll have an adjournment. But if the meeting is cooler, it will carry on. Okay, so with no further ado, I will do introductions. I'm going to invite everyone to introduce themselves. I'll read your name out, and I'm going to start with members. And if you can reply by stating your name and saying present. Those who are not able to confirm they're present will be recorded as absent from the meeting, and then we'll go on to apologies after that. So I will start with Councillor Norton.
Thank you, Susie. Councillor Terry Norton, present.
Welcome. Councillor Smith.
Councillor Jeanette Smith, present.
Welcome. And Councillor Smythe. Okay, and now we'll go on to officers. We've got the Alisons. So Alison Edgerton.
Alison Edgerton here.
Thank you. Alison Smart.
Alison Smart, I'm the Housing Business Partner for Housing Neighbourhoods and Building Services, and I'm present.
Welcome. And Alison Jeffrey.
Alison Jeffrey, Director, Children, Families and Education, present.
Oh, welcome. Angela Mann.
Hello, I'm Angela Mann. I'm Finance Manager for Children's, Families and Education.
Thank you. Maria.
Sorry, Councillor Horton, I'm covering for Maria Smith.
Okay, so you're here for Maria.
Yeah.
Mike.
Yeah, Mike Stoneman, I'm Deputy Director, Education, present.
Sarah.
Sarah Daly, Deputy Director, Children and Families, present.
Thank you. And last on my list is Lisa.
Lisa Gallagher, present.
So I think we've covered it. Is there anybody who's here who hasn't had a chance to introduce themselves then? Right in the... Okay. I can't see anyone. So the item, we'll go straight on then. So agenda item number 1 is apologies for absence. I haven't received any. Lisa?
No, Chair, I've not received any apologies for absence.
Okay. All right then. So item number 2 is declarations of interest. I have a standard interest, which is that I am governor at Craneswater Junior School. Terry.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just my usual declaration. I teach at Mayfield School, albeit through an outside company.
Thank you. Jeanette, I do apologise. I've just seen that you actually got in there 1 minute before Terry on the request to speak, so I apologise about that. I'll come to you now.
No worries. It's just my normal one that I'm a paid official of Hampshire Branch Unison. So if there is any Unison strategic issues that come up, then I might have to withdraw.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so on to the first main item on the agenda, which is the foster carer adoptions policy. And I believe, Alison Smart, you are going to deliver the report on this. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. This report brings forward 3 recommendations that the Cabinet member approves the amendments to the policy that was attached to Appendix A when it went out, that the Cabinet member gives delegated authority to the Director to approve the individual business cases in line with the financial rules, and that going forward the foster care adoption policy is referred to as the care adoption policy. The background behind this is that in June 2019, the Cabinet agreed the creation of a new policy to support adoptions to carers' homes. At the point at that time, it was special guardianships and foster carers, and there was also no cap to the allowance. What we've actually asked for in this case is to change it to carers' policies, and that we cap any individual spend to up to £50,000. That's what I'm asking for the recommendation for. Does anybody else want any more background?
Okay, so so I think it's quite straightforward, but has anyone got any questions or comments that they want to make? No, I think so. I think it's very sensible. The change in name is sensible, and actually the policy is a great one. So it's interesting, actually. My very first year as a councillor, I remember having a long conversation with somebody when I was out canvassing one night, and who was actually really imploring me to take this back to the council and say, please, can I add on another bedroom, because I really want to take more children. So it's a great policy, and I think those are very sensible recommendations. So just so we're clear for the meeting, I'm approving the amendments to the policy to provide financial support to carers who meet the requirements as laid out in the policy Appendix A, and that I will give delegation to the Director of Children, Families and Education to approve individual business cases in line with the finance rules as laid out in the policy, and that going forward the foster carer adoption policy is now referred to as the carer adoption policy, which will cover all carers within Portsmouth. So thank you very much, Alison. You are more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you want, but if you want to shoot off, then that's totally understandable. So thank you for your report.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. So the next agenda item is, make sure I get my papers right, is the Children, Families and Education Portfolio Budget Monitoring Report for the financial end 2019-20. So Angela, are you doing this then?
I am, Councillor Horton.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, hand over to you to present the report.
Thank you. The reports for noting the revenue and capital positions at the end of 2019-20 financial year, and the pressures which would be going into 2020-21. The final outturn position was an overspend of 3.3 million, with the biggest overspend on residential placements for looked after children of 2.6 million, as had been reported during the year. The other area where there was a large overspend was home to school transport. These and the other areas where there were variances against the budget are in table 5.1, with section 6 giving the explanations. The capital programme was 21.4 million below the budget, but that's as a result of the long-term nature of the programme, and it's envisaged that there will be a break-even position. The details of the schemes are in the table in 7.5 and in Appendix 2. Don't know whether you've got any questions.
Okay. So it's probably worth noting that these are kind of the two budget pressures are long-term ones, and I will come to just look at my screen went blank then. Jeanette Smith, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you. obviously it's a very comprehensive report financially, and it's a future question really because of COVID. What pressures will that bring extra to the 3.3 million from last year? Do we have a guess?
That's covered in the next report on
Right.
Q1 budget monitoring. So I don't know whether I can go through the information there, and then if there's any more questions, I can answer them after that report.
Yeah, because obviously it's sort of linked because, you know, obviously I'm concerned about a 3.3 million over budget, which we all are, but whether that's going to be compounded even more. And so I think the two reports are joined together, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, if you're happy, then we'll pick that up in the next next item. Okay, that's great. Is there any other comments, or we're happy just to note this? Of course, the other thing that's probably worth noting, although the money adds up the same, is that it's the first time that those two portfolios are brought together. And so I actually think it's a very sensible thing, and moving forward we'll be able to look at the kind of synergies between the two of them, but it's probably worth noting that. Okay, in which case, thank you for that. So that's the decision is to note that this portfolio finance outturn position for last financial year and the 3.3 million in excess of the approved cash limit provision, noting the ongoing pressures within the portfolio as highlighted in the report, with those particularly in those two areas, but note the position in respect of the approved capital schemes for the portfolio. So thank you, Angela, for that. So should we just go straight on to you then for the next one, which is probably where we can expand that discussion. And this is the Children, Families and Education Portfolio Budget Monitoring Report for this first quarter of 2021. Back to you.
Thank you. So this report is for noting and sets out the financial position for the portfolio as at the end of June 2020. Excluding the COVID-19 related impacts of 1.3 million, which are being accommodated corporately, the portfolio would be expected to underspend by just under £500,000. And the capital programme is forecast to stay within budget. I suppose just to pick up on the previous conversation, the budget was increased in line with the medium-term financial strategy that was produced, and the budgets were realigned into the areas where there was pressures. The table at paragraph 5.1 sets out the summary position for the portfolio, showing the overall projected overspend and the pressure in relation to just COVID-19, with the reasons in the following paragraphs in section 4. The three areas of biggest note are home to school transport, looked after children, and early help, which we can take in turn. The home to school transport was projecting a net pressure of 89,000 due to uncertainty over bubbles and social distancing. And it was only 89,000 because it was partially mitigated by savings earlier in the year as less pupils were travelling to school. The looked after children pressure includes pressures in respect of price increases due to COVID-19, also an increase in numbers of looked after children due to COVID-19, but these have been offset by an increase in the unaccompanied asylum seeking minors grants for both care leavers and under 18s, which we project will be worth over £1 million if the numbers stay the same. Early help is projecting an overspend because due to the pandemic, it was anticipated that there would be a need to invest in the team to support families due to COVID-19 lockdown. Finally, the capital programme is forecast to stay within budget, the details of which are in table 5.5 and appendix 1. And so I don't know if there's any questions on that report.
Councillor Smith, do you want to come back on that, given your previous one, or does that
No, it makes me more worried, to be perfectly blunt. It's okay having that sort of pressure and the overspend, but are there any things that we can do now to mitigate that overspend to try and make it manageable, whether it's putting more money into the children and families portfolio, or is it a case of we just have to wait and see and then decide what we're going to do? Because that's a huge amount of money to try and save on an overspend.
Shall I? I think I'm able to answer this. So the overspend is being managed corporately as part of the COVID-19. So there's a range of grants that the council's received, and also there's a strategy for meeting pressures that are over and above that. Our overspend forms part of the £34 million of pressures that are related to the COVID-19 that's being reported corporately and is being provided for corporately. It's just that it's not, those things haven't been allocated down to the portfolio yet, but it is being, viewed. It is part of the corporate strategy to account for those.
Sorry, so my next question to Councillor Horton then is, are the administration writing to central government and putting pressure on central government to try and plug that hole?
Well, in terms of the black hole, in terms of the finances generally? Yeah.
And especially children's or adults.
I believe there have been several bits of correspondence around that. Obviously we will carry on putting that pressure on government to do that. I think the current estimate is about £14 million black hole. So yes is the answer to that. I think the positive thing about this was that actually pre-COVID, it was actually looking like a lot of the strategies that had been invested in terms of particularly around family safeguarding, were actually beginning to show some kind of positive, we're talking about finance here, invest to save kind of positive news, and that the actual budget was looking like it was going to come in, notwithstanding the base budget that's been increased over the years, but actually it was looking like these things were beginning to pay off. But obviously then COVID puts a different light on that, and all of us in this meeting know the impact of that on children and families. So yes, I believe that there is lots of communication going back to central government about needing the money to fill this black hole. Definitely have seen correspondence via the LGA, but also direct to government. And take your point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other comment? I can't see. Oh, Terry, sorry, beg your pardon. Terry, I've just seen that come up.
I'm happy for Mike to go first, actually. He may answer some of the
Mike.
Yeah, just on the education side, just to say, in Q1 there are some obviously significant overspends in there, but what I can say is on the homeschool transport, the position is looking better. So although there is an overspend there, that is improved, and the forecasts we had originally are not quite as dire as what we were predicting. And then also around school improvement, we had a commitment there to support digital learning in the city, to support remote access to education, and we were forecasting a fairly significant amount to support that. Again, that's come down considerably as well. So I just want to make the point that in Q2, I know you're not seeing that at the moment, but things will improve. So we are managing it as carefully as we can, but there will obviously be some pressures, but I think it'll be a better picture for Q2. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. I think actually you raise a really good point, which is a lot of, when you do budget forecasting, you kind of usually got a pretty good idea about what you're managing, and COVID is throwing all sorts of curveballs. Councillor Norton.
Thank you. Yeah, I try not to go over points that I've made in the briefing, so it's not particularly helpful, but there are a few things that I still need to get my head around. One is on the homeschool transport. So we're saying that homeschool transport is going to break even despite, or have an overspend despite, a 6-month period of children not using that service. So I guess that's where I'm still trying to get my head around why that's happened, really. Is there anything we can, you can say to us to clear that up a little bit, really?
Well, I think the position is going to get even better on this one for this year. I mean, it'd be interesting how we get on the following year. Angela might want to come in, but we obviously made a significant saving in the summer term because we weren't effectively providing homeschool transport, and that was a significant saving. But then the costs have obviously gone up because we've had to provide 20 additional minibuses, for example, to support homeschool transport for the autumn term and beyond. But nevertheless, that saving we made in that first quarter is significant. So in a better position. Plus, we've been able to access DFE grants for homeschool transport. We've had one grant in. I think Angela might want to correct me on this, but we're expecting another. So that will help enormously on homeschool transport. So that's why we're in a better position than perhaps you might have thought. And in fact, it is going to improve in quarter two. But Angela, have I said anything out of turn to make sure I've covered that correctly?
No, I think Mike summed it up. The grant that we got, which was to recognise our additional pressures as a result of bubbles and social distancing, that was just under 97,000, which we received notification of after the quarter one budget monitoring, so that pays for that overspend, but we hadn't projected for it. And in June we didn't know exactly how many people we would be allowed in the minibuses, so we had to project based on things we didn't know about, and actually the way pupils are allowed to be meant that fewer minibuses were needed than we projected in June. And as Mike also said, it looks as though there's potentially another grant for November to the end of December as well to cover some of the home to school transport costs. But we've not heard back from that yet, but we have submitted information.
Having said all of that, we are mindful of the fact that I hope we're not going to have a summer lockdown as we had this year. So in the next year, if we're running homeschool transport as we would normally do, and indeed perhaps under these sort of restrictions as well, then that will be a significant pressure. So we're having to plan for that. But at the moment, for this year, it's looking positive. If I can say that.
Yeah. Thank you. Is that Terry? Have you got further question?
Yeah, if I could, just to pick up on a few things that Councillor Smith said. Really, and I agree with Councillor Smith. I think there is always the option to put more money into this budget, and I guess that's a decision or an argument for you to have, Susie, really, with the administration and the leader of the council. But I've made that point before. From a school's perspective, in terms of the impact of COVID, I think it probably is fair to say, and again, this was raised on the briefing and in various other education-related meetings. The schools certainly that I've been and visited, the grants from the government have been put to good use. I know that head teachers support that additional funding for cleaning and things like that, and you're seeing additional cleaners throughout the day cleaning classrooms, whereas before you'd maybe see a cleaning team in the morning and cleaning in the afternoon. My concern, I think, for this is as raised previously, is around things like cover costs and money that it costs to get in and cover staff who may not be in during this time. So from a school's perspective, just from my experience, the costs of the day-to-day currently are being handled quite well, and I know that heads support and welcome those grants. It's down the line, I think, would be my concern, to shadow Councillor Smith's comments.
Okay, thank you. Alison Jeffrey, you've got your hand. Oh no, you got RTS.
Well, I did, Councillor Horton, but only to make the point that Mike had actually already made about the pressure for next year if the grant doesn't continue in homeschool transport. But so that was all.
It is a very unusual thing to be saying we're okay for homeschool transport in all the time that I've been involved. So we say that with caution. Okay. All right, and actually, I do take on board what you're saying, Terry, Councillor Norton, about the pressures on schools, and some of that may well be more related to the next agenda item when we look at the designated school grant and might be more, sort of be able to look at some of those things then. Okay, so that is item 5. So that is for noting and the education portfolio forecast revenue and capital budget positions at the end of June 2020, along with the variance and pressure explanation. So thank you very much, Angela, for that report as well. So as I said, the next item is the DSG, the Designated Schools Grant Outturn report. And I believe, although it's money still, it's going over to Alison Edgerton.
It is, Councillor Horton. Okay, so this report is for noting. The report sets out the Dedicated Schools Grant year-end position for the financial year 2019-20 as at the 31st of March 2020. It sets out the impact of the coronavirus lockdown on the 23rd of March had on the financial year-end process and the assumptions that were made in finalising the accounts. At the end of the financial year, the Dedicated Schools Grant carried forward was actually decreased by a net 165,000 and carried forward an overall balance of 3.1 million. The report sets out the details behind the final balance with explanations regarding any over and underspends in each of the funding blocks. However, I'd like to draw your attention to 2 areas. The underspend on the early years budget was due to reduction in the number of pupils over the course of the year. This has been reflected in the January 2020 census and is expected to lead to a reduction in the early years block funding in the 2021 financial year. And in fact, details are set out in the next report for the Q1 monitoring and the revised budget, which is on the agenda. The high needs block was overspent by a net 694,000. It mostly relates to the mainstream education, health and care plans. So these are pupils in mainstream schools, pupils placed in outer cities independent provision, and post-16 pupils with education, health and care plans. The overall underspend on the high needs block, the majority of that was covered by the underspend on the schools block and the early years block, and the remaining amount came from the 18-19 balance carry forward. Finally, the report just asks the Cabinet member to note the year-end outturn position, and I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Alison. Are there any, so this is wrapping up last year's DSG basically, so are there any comments from or questions from Councillor Smith or Councillor Norton? I think the report says it quite clearly. Okay. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. On page 44 about special schools, there's it states about 173,600 underspend. I'm surprised to see an underspend. So, and I know there's an explanation about 36 pupils placed in special schools by other local authorities and offset by additional funding. But could you just go into that? Seems to be quite a high underspend on special schools.
Yeah, if I just explain how we budget for the special schools.
Okay.
So when we set the budget for the special school, we assume that the places at that special school are full of Portsmouth City Council children, because when we're setting the budget, we're working in effect almost a year ahead of the budget of those actual pupils being in school. Of those pupils, there are always an element that are funded from other local authorities. So these are pupils that reside in other local authorities but attend our special schools. And those home local authorities are responsible for paying the element 3 top-up funding. By doing that, this gives us a small contingency within that overall budget, which allows us to deal with any overspends that are elsewhere within the high needs block. In particular, we find that it's very difficult to forecast the outer city pupils and also those pupils in mainstream schools with education, health and care plans, partly because of the volume for the mainstream schools, but with the outer city schools pupils, it's often the complexity of need, and it's very difficult to actually identify a cost for those. So we use that as a way of offsetting potential overspends in future years.
Okay, thank you. I think from a public reading that document, that explains why that underspend is there and how it's sort of calculated, and that's really useful. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I can't see any other questions or comments. So, as Alison said, this is a report for noting on the revenue and capital budget positions at the end of June 2020, together with the variance and pressure explanations. So now we go same budget, but onto Q1 monitoring and budget revision, and back to Alison, I believe.
It is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so this report sets out the dedicated schools grant forecast position for 2021 financial year as at the 30th of June, and it also advises of proposed revisions to the 2021 dedicated schools grant budget. I'll deal with the monitoring first, and then I'll go on to the budget proposals. So the forecast at the end of June is very much where we would expect it during the first quarter. For the end of June, we are still partway through the summer term, and we then therefore do not have actual pupil data to forecast a year-end position on a number of our budget headings. Therefore, the majority of those headings that are relating to pupil-related budgets are forecast to be on budget. There are two exceptions. One is the Growth Fund, which is forecasting a planned underspend of 284,000. Of that, a consultation is due to go out to schools with regard to carrying forward that underspend for use in 21-22 for the same purpose. The other area is the Element 3 top-up funding for alternative provision, which is forecast to overspend by 56,000, the details of which are in the report. The net position provides a forecast carry forward of approximately 3.2 million as at the end of June, which Cabinet member is requested to note. I'm happy to take any questions on the forecast position.
Thank you, Alison. Are there any questions or comments about that? None from Councillor Norton. Councillor Smith? No. Okay, then, in which case, thank you for the report, Alison, and I've noted the forecast year-end budget position for the DSG as on the 30th of June 2020, together with the associated explanations, and approved the revision of the 2021 budget as set out in Appendix 1 and Section 4. So thank you very much for those reports.
Thank you.
Now, so that brings us on to the next agenda item, which is the maintained schools balances as of the 31st of March 2020. Is that back to Angela?
It is. Thank you, Councillor Horton.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is an annual report that provides an update on the position of maintained school balances as at the end of March 2020. Section 4 sets out the revenue balances, and in particular, the second table shows the balances for 2018-19 and 2019-20 financial years, and adjusted for academy conversions. This shows an overall drop in balances of just over £300,000. Of the 4.1 million of balances, approximately 700,000 is committed or relates to community-related balances, leaving just over 3.5 million of uncommitted balances. There are two schools that have a deficit balance at the end of the financial year, one of which has submitted a deficit recovery plan and is currently being reviewed. The authority has carried out a review of those uncommitted balances that are either considered excessive, which is in excess of 20%, or are causing concern, which reduced by 25% or more. And the report details the outcomes of those reviews, including the progress made by schools that were picked up in the review at the end of 2018-19. At the end of the year, there was a notable drop in revenue balances compared to 2018-19, and the level of balances across maintained schools ranges from deficits to balances in excess of 20%. We are continuing to work with schools to support them in managing their long-term financial position, flexing the support we're able to give them according to individual circumstances. Section 6 sets out the capital balances, which shows an academy adjusted reduction from 2.2 million to 1.3 million. The majority of this movement is due to a large building project being undertaken. Finally, the report asks Cabinet members to note the level of maintained schools revenue balances and capital balances as at 31st of March 2020, as shown in appendices 2 and 3, and the monitoring action taken by the Council.
Thank you. I think it's pretty straightforward. That report, are there any questions or comments? No. Just from my point of view, it's just to say I really do value that report, because there are often stories behind those situations, but I do think it's really important, particularly whether they're excessive reserves, is that actually we're very confident about why that money is staying within the school, and a lot of times there are very plausible explanations. So thank you very much for that report. And it's recommended that I note the level of maintained schools revenue balances and capital balances as the 31st of March 2020, as shown in appendices 2 and 3, and the monitoring action taken by the Council. So thank you very much for that. Angela, are we staying with you for the next one?
Yes.
So this is the school funding arrangements for 2021-2022.
Thank you.
Back to you.
Thank you. The report sets out the main information that was contained in the policy documents, and it sets out the changes to the schools block and central services dedicated schools grant blocks, and point out that we're expecting further information on the high needs block and early years DSG. There were 2 technical changes that were made, which was inclusion of teachers' pay grant, the teachers' pension employers grant and supplementary grants, and updating the income deprivation affecting children indices, and to utilise the 2019 data set. The report also mentions the fact that the rules on transfers between blocks haven't changed from the previous year, but there are no proposals for a transfer to be made in 21-22. Paragraph 5.2 lists all the changes to the schools block DSG funding, which incorporates the technical changes. In terms of how this is then distributed to schools per the national funding factor values, this is covered in paragraphs 5.3 onwards. Appendix 1 compares the factor values used in Portsmouth in 2021 and 21-22, and factor per the policy documents. We have further work to understand the changes in relation to the income deprivation affecting children indices for both the bands and what the 2019 data set means, and we're hoping to have looked at this by the end of October. The proposals for managing affordability are described in section 5, as the authority normally receives the initial funding allocation in mid to late December, which is too late to obtain any further approval before presenting the final budget for approval in mid-January. Therefore, to ensure that officers are able to propose an affordable budget to schools forum and to Cabinet member, it is proposed that the following factors would be adjusted. The first would be that the area cost adjustment for Portsmouth of 1.42% would not be added to the national funding formula factors. And second, that the level of the minimum funding guarantee would be reduced to a lower level than plus 2%, but higher than plus 0.5% per pupil. Report also mentions the disapplication request, where each year local authorities can submit disapplication requests to the SFA, where strict adherence to the legislation would generate perverse results for specific schools. For 21-22, the authority will be submitting a disapplication request, as in previous years, for Arc Charter Academy, the details of which are in 6.2 and 6.3. The report also detailed what we knew about the high needs block at the time, which was an increase to Portsmouth of 12.7% when compared to 2020-21. It includes the paying pensions grants and also the IDACI changes. And the actual funding, though, will not be known until December 2020. And we're waiting to understand how the changes to the grants that are now in there will be passed to schools. The early years block funding has not yet been released, but it'll be brought as and when we know more about it. And the final part of the report in section 11 gives an update on the SEND strategy, which is an important part of keeping within the high needs dedicated schools grant funding, and it details the information we have about mainstream EHCP banding, and section 12 mentions the proposals of the bands, and based on the current information, which is based on July 2020 information, it would increase the cost to the high needs DSG by just over £20,000, but the banding values will be set in January next year after the high needs block allocations are known.
Thank you, Angela, for that. I think I'm getting used to this pattern of about the out of sync of finding out the information we need to know in order to be able to move forward with the formula. I have a question actually, briefly on the early years block. Is this the one where it's based on the census of free school meals? Is that the money which is based on that?
The early years funding is based on the previous January.
Oh, it's the previous January. Okay.
But things are different this year because of COVID.
So I was thinking.
So we've been told that next year's allocation, because it would be based on January 21, and it's anticipated that the numbers will be lower, artificially lower, then they're actually going to use January 2020 numbers to assess the funding. But what they will give us for the rest of the year, we're not sure yet, but we know that actually part of our funding for 21-22 will be based on January 20 census information.
Do we have any idea at this moment whether that, I mean, obviously compared with this year, next year's, sorry, would not be good, but have we got any idea with the difference between 2020 and 22, for example, in terms of early years? Whether we were on a trajectory of increasing numbers and therefore we won't have as much, or whether it's quite similar?
I think our numbers were reducing.
Okay, so it might be the opposite.
Yes, and the service are doing counts this month, I think, so we'll get an idea of what the actual numbers are in early years, and then we'll be able to have an idea of actually how much grant we will be getting. So yeah, so October half term, the count I think is going to happen. But I've been told that as in previous years, early years tends to be the last thing that gets announced. So it tends to be the schools block, then the high needs block, and then early years, and we haven't actually been told yet when we might hear what 21-22 figures look like.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Any questions or comments? No. Okay, so thank you very much then. So I'm just noting the DFE proposed changes to school revenue funding arrangements for 2021-2022. Approve the proposals for implementing the local funding formula arrangements that are set out in the report, and also identifying that I have noted the implementation for the NFF rates for both primary and secondary schools, as that was in Appendix 1, implementing MFG, the minimum funding guarantee of at least 0.5% and up to 2% subject to affordability. That's for 2021-22, as in paragraph 5.16. And also the method of managing affordability as set out in paragraph 5.17. And finally, the implementation of the disapplication request as set out in section 6 for charter. Okay, thank you, Angela, for that. I think that might be you off the hook. Thanks very much for that. And we go on to the next item, which is the Annual Adoption Agency Activity Report, March 2020. And I think Sarah is going to be presenting this.
Yes, I am. So this is the adoption report covering the period 19 to 20. It reflects the development of the Regional Adoption Agency, which was a result of the DfE regionalising adoption publication. We are in a regional agency with Hampshire, the Isle of Wight, Portsmouth and Southampton, and joining us in that collaboration are Barnardo's and PACT as the voluntary independent agencies. That agency has now been live since April 2019 and is specifically responsible for recruitment, assessment and the post-adoption support element. And that has really enabled us to join together collaboratively, to work together rather than competing with one another, and to offer an enhanced support offer out to those adoptive families. The impact on outcomes for children has been positive, as you will see from the report, with 25 Portsmouth children being adopted in the year 19 to 20, as opposed to 15 in the previous year. A further 21 of our children have been positively matched for adoption. The number of children nationally placed for adoption and who have a plan for adoption has decreased, and that is something that's reflected in our own local data. That reflects a real positive approach to identification of family members, to identify alternative placements for children outside of adoption. The court process is very clear that adoption is very much the final consideration for any child, and we work proactively with families in Portsmouth to establish alternative permanence for those children. Timeliness for any child travelling towards adoption is absolutely critical and is an important measure for us to consider when we're reviewing how well we do as a local authority. Obviously, within any cohort of children being placed for adoption, there are children with significantly complex needs, and we understand each and every one of those children and understand where there are delays, whether those are reasonable delays, because we are confident we will find the right family for those children, and we review those care plans for each individual children regularly as a service. So we have seen that performance in terms of timeliness has improved significantly for us as a local authority, and that children are adopted well within that overall national measure. Adoption recruitment has been positive as well, with 121 adoptive families approved in 19 to 20, and we see that assessments across the piece are undertaken in a timely manner, again critically ensuring that children are matched at the earliest possible opportunity. Alongside this, we are able to jointly make applications to the Adoption Support Fund. It's regularly access to support families and enables them to access significant therapeutic input for children who are identified as being in need of that resource. We've also been able, as an organisation, as part of that RAA, we have been able to access additional money as a result of the impact of COVID, which clearly has impacted on some of those children in a more significant way. So overall, we can reflect that us joining the Regional Adoption Agency has been positive, both for children being placed, but also for those families seeking to offer those adoptive placements. And this report just requests that you note that positive outcome and that we have that ongoing support to continue with this arrangement at this time.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's really lovely to have such a positive item coming to this meeting. I don't know whether there are any questions or comments from Councillor Smith or Councillor Norton. No. Thank you so much for that report, and it, as we have said at previous points, that it's really heartening to hear that positive story. Okay, and that was an information item, and actually the last item is a reporting back item. Really, it was about the amalgamation of Wimborne infant and junior schools. This was taken. The decision was taken on the 25th of March. Actually, it was under the new arrangements for before we were meeting up under the coronavirus rules and regulations. So, and part of those rules and regulations are that it needs to come to the first meeting that we're having. So that's why it's on the agenda. So it's not really for discussion. It's just really for reporting back. And that actually brings us to the end of this meeting. So my huge thanks to everybody for the reports that have been written and presented, and thanks to Councillor Norton and Councillor Smith for your questions. And I bid you adieu. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank all the officers for their reports as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye all.
Bye-bye, everyone.